Hi there, it's Paul here from Volaticus Films, an aerial production company with an interest in flight simulation and aviation. Today I am taking a navigation app for a ride. This is Foreflight. I've been using this on a couple of flights, but I really wanted to get into a little bit more detail with it. And I'm going to be comparing it with another app called Navigraph Charts, which is in some ways a very similar sort of application, but in other ways quite different. So what I'm going to do is two flights. First of all, this flight's going to be using Foreflight as the main navigational tool, and then we'll be switching over to Navigraph on the next flight. What I'm going to do is have the I'm going to have Navigraph running on a separate screen, so it's not going to be the main focus today, but I think it'd be quite useful to have it as a comparison. So let's turn over to Foreflight and have a look at that. Just give a very quick overview. I'm going to do some planning and then we're going to get going on a flight. This is the main interface. It's a map view. There is also an airports view, which allows us to bring up airports in the database, and also a charts view. We don't have any charts in there at the moment. So back to the map view. This allows us to plan a flight. This could be VFR or IFR. Today we're going to be planning an IFR flight, and then flying it, and you can be able to see it tracking our progress on the route. So this does a huge amount. Foreflight is an amazingly capable application. The other tool that I'm going to be comparing with, Navigraph Charts, there's not really a huge amount of overlap. But there is a bit of an overlap where we're doing IFR flying. But there's certainly distinct reasons why you choose one or the other. Foreflight, unfortunately for some of you, is only available on iOS devices. So that's Apple, iPad. You can also use an iPhone version, which is a little bit limited. I was trying that the other day, and it's just a little bit too limited for this comparison. There's no Android version, unfortunately. Navigraph Charts that runs on Android, iOS and desktop, so it's a bit more versatile there. Okay, well, let's get straight into it. So we are parked here at Palo Alto in California, and we're going to do a flight down to Van Nuys, IFR. And what I want to do is really show how we could use Foreflight to prepare for our flight and plan our IFR route, and then monitor our route as we're making progress down to Van Nuys. So the first thing we're going to do here is have a look at the weather. So one thing we can do is we could get the ATIS for Palo Alto, which is probably a good idea. But just to give us an idea, we could click on the airport, Palo Alto, bring up full screen. That switches now to the airports tab, if you see that bottom left. Now it's now displaying a summary of the airport, and if I click on the little thumbnail on the top left, it gives you a slightly bigger version of the ground diagram, which is largely simplified compared with the sort of Jefferson taxi diagram. One thing that Foreflight provides you, it's really an app aimed at GA pilots, at people flying for real, and executive pilots. Gives you a lot of information that, yes, you could get for free, but it ties it all into the app and it does it in an incredible way. So we're here to have a look at the weather. As I say, we could and we will get the ATIS before we go anywhere. I just make a note of the frequency 135275. But there's a weather tab, and that's getting a constant feed from the internet for the weather at Palo Alto, which is calm winds, sky clear, a typical Californian weather, really. And so we have a bit of a choice of runway here. It's just one runway, 3-1 and 1-3. I'm probably going to go for 3-1 because that's more or less the direction that it's the nearest part of the runway to where we're parked, put it that way. It's a short runway though, so shortly after takeoff we'll do a turn and then we'll pick up on the route. So that's Palo Alto. So let's have a look at Van Nuys weather now. And on the weather tab there, very similar to here, wind is light and variable, sky clear. One thing about this is that we could actually plan our approach based on that weather prognosis not changing dramatically. We could look at the TAF for Van Nuys, in fact, which will give us the sort of prediction of how that weather's likely to change. And it looks like it's variable, very, very light. So really, we can choose whichever runway, obviously subject to air traffic control restrictions. So we've checked the weather there. Let's switch back. I want to switch back to Palo Alto, and I can go on to recents and then switch back there. And that will actually give us the airports that we recently looked at and have a look at the weather. So the information I want from there is the altimeter setting 3015. So I'm just going to make a mental note of that. And then switch back to the map view. Now, there's seems to be an almost infinite number of variations of maps in Foreflight. And I'm not going to go through them all here. This is your basic aeronautical view. It's this kind of simplified view with airports, VORs, some fixes, some airspace marked on that, but it's not, strictly speaking, a VFR or an IFR chart. I can actually switch an overlay on, which, suddenly it's the VFR sectional for San Francisco area. That's pretty neat. And actually, when I'm flying IFR, this is quite a useful view as well, not least for terrain clearance. So in addition to that, we could summon up the IFR low altitude chart, and also the high altitude chart. And this is the chart that we're going to be using for the flight today. So let's just switch that off temporarily and back to aeronautical. And what we're going to do is we're going to plan the route, and I want to show you how there's, in fact, lots of ways of doing this in Foreflight, but the starting point would be to enter your departure airport, KPAO. And it's highlighted that on the map there. And then KVNY, Van Nuys. And straight away, if I click on this icon here, will show us our entire route. So it's just simply a straight line from Palo Alto to Van Nuys. So it's not actually giving us an IFR route or a permitted route that could be going through Area 51. It will just do a straight line between 2 points. So what we can do, there's a couple of choices really. We could bring up the IFR high-level chart, because I'm going to be cruising at highish level. We're flying the Cirrus Jet, the SF50 today. Cruise altitude, the ceiling is 28,000, so flight level 280. So we are definitely in the higher levels of the charts. So if we zoom in, you see the magenta line represents our track from one airport to another. But what I really want to do is pick it up on an airway and just eyeballing the route. You can see really J1, the Juliet 1, seems to be the most direct, going down to Fillmore. Now, the only problem with Juliet's 1 is that it's quite awkward to pick it up. We end up flying half the route before we get to any sort of point of intersection, which would be Avenel VOR. So what I'm going to do in terms of the plan, I'm going to plan from the Oakland VOR, where Juliet 1 emanates, and pick up on the route between Oakland and Avenel after departure from Palo Alto. And that would typically be a way of joining an airway like that. But as I say, there's a number of ways of doing this, and they vary depending on what your preferred method is. I just want to show you one way. Click on the FPL, that's the flight plan, and there's a routes button. And what this is showing me is all of the routes that have been filed, valid routes filed with ATC from all different types of aircraft, and you can see the list here actually details the route and also the type of aircraft. So the top one, for example, will be no good to us because it's going to be a lower level IFR flight. But as we scroll down, you can see there's some here. This one, SJC Vinco, goes up to flight level 250. There's another Vinco at 230 there. And right at the bottom, there's an Airways route. And if I select that, it shows you the actual routing. It doesn't show much detail, but it gives you an idea of the routing. It shows you it's a fairly straight route, whereas some of the others are more dog legs. So adds a little bit of distance to the route. And then if I like what I saw, I could just click select, and that would then, if I just zoom out a moment, and you can see now it's added a number of waypoints between Palo Alto and Van Nuys to get us down there. And we could put this into the flight plan in the G1000 on board the aircraft and fly it. There'll be no problem there. What I am going to do is to clear that, and it's didn't really mean to clear everything, but sometimes it's quicker to do this, type it in again. So the other way we could do it is we could zoom in there and we could have a look at the waypoints that we want. So we want to pick up on the Juliet 1, but I'm going to do it from Oakland because there's nowhere it intersects with that's nearer really than that. We could go down to the San Jose VOR, but there's not any airways, higher level airways coming off there. So what I can do is I can click on a bit of the magenta line until I see it move, and then I can drag that up and try and drag that up to near Oakland. There it is. So unfortunately, the flight plan was blocking the view a bit, but actually I will open that up because it'll actually show how the route's being constructed. And what we can do, say after Oakland, insert a waypoint after, and then put Juliet 1, insert. So it's now put that in there. And then all we need to do, actually we are on Juliet 1 all the way down to Fillmore. So all we do is after Juliet 1, so insert after, put Fillmore, F-I-M, insert that. And if I have a look at the whole route, you'll see that it's now filled out the middle bits. It's maybe not so obvious, but if I click on the navlog, it'll show that technically we're flying from Palo Alto to Oakland, Oakland to Avenal, Avenal to Derby, Derby to Rise. These are intersections. So it's added those because they're on the Juliet 1 route, and then Fillmore directs Van Nuys. But we will almost certainly be flying Fillmore to pick up the ILS approach into Van Nuys 16 right. But we're not going to worry about that for the moment. But that's it. That's really all it comes down to. Then that route may well have been already filed, but I wanted to show you how to put that in yourself. Now, we're not going to fly a standard instrument departure from Palo Alto because I suspect there isn't anything of interest, but I will have a look. So what we can do, if we wanted to set up a departure from an airfield, click on procedures, and then we've got the arrival and approach. Now we don't have any departures because Palo Alto doesn't have any standard instrument departures. That's what I'm assuming here. If it did, they would actually be listed as departures. We do have arrivals into Van Nuys, so we could actually have a look at those. Now, it's very interesting. It's very visual, this tool. And what we could do is we could, say, from Avenal, pick up on one of the inbound arrivals into Van Nuys. But it's just replicating the journey we're doing anyway from Avenal, Derby, Rise to Fillmore. We're doing that anyway, so there's not really any saving there for us. So I'm not going to bother with an arrival procedure because we're kind of flying our own one. But in terms of the approach, we've got the ILS Yankee 16 right, and we've got the Yankee 16 a Zulu 16 right. And I struggle really to find the difference between these two. I have no idea what the difference is. But we'll set that up en route when we're on our way down. We don't really need to add it to Foreflight because bear in mind what you do in Foreflight is not actually commanding the aircraft to fly in any particular way. It's just whatever you put in, you will track it. And so basically, hopefully, try to make sure it's the same as the aircraft. Otherwise, it'll look like you're going off track when you're not. Okay, so as I say, I'm going to leave the approach as it is for the moment, i.e. no approach. And the other thing, because Foreflight is aimed at real-world pilots, particularly GA, one thing you can do is you can package up all of the plates that you might use and the maps that you're using en route, and even the data for things like fuel prices, the sort of information that you'd be interested in as a pilot. And you can package that up and you can take it with you and you can access it offline, which is fantastic. I don't need to worry about that. I'm a desktop pilot here today. I've got live internet, but apart from the sort of live weather and that sort of thing you would get, the rest of this would be packaged up and would be freely accessible without an internet connection. Okay, so that's that. What I'd like to do now is switch over to Navigraph, and I'm just going to start that going now. Okay, that's recording now. So what I'm going to do is, I say, I'm going to use Navigraph on this route. It's a secondary navigation tool. Just want to show you the difference, really. Let's have a look at KPAO, if it exists. It does. And then if we click on the charts icon there, it loads the charts up and it will give you, for example, taxi diagram. And in fact, if I click that little pointer icon, it actually shows a live position of the aircraft on most of these charts, particularly the taxi charts and particularly the approach charts. Less so with the arrivals because they tend not to be scale charts. They tend not to be to scale, which means it's very much more difficult to show you an accurate rendition of where you are on those charts. But the approach charts are to scale. And it will also show you on the map as well. So if we click on the map, it shows us in Palo Alto, very basic maps, just an IFR rendition. But what I'd like to do is just replicate that route that we created in Foreflight. So we go to flights, click the plus sign to create a new flight. This is slightly different here. We put in our starting point. It's not very well labelled, but this field is for our starting point. So KPAO. Oops. And then KVNY is our destination. And it'll want a flight name. So stick one of those in. And we could just create that, and it will just create a basic line between those 2 points. If I click on the icon there, it just creates a straight line, just sort of like we saw in Foreflight there. And then the idea is we can go in exactly the same ways and we can start building that route up. Now, one thing I don't really recommend is doing this using Navigraph charts, because it's not interactive. From what I gather, you can't click on a bit of the map and then drag it to snap to a VOR or an internet fix or an airway segment. You have to basically tap in the data, so you have to know it in advance. So you're probably going to need to use SkyVector or something like that, or SimBrief is actually a good one as well for setting all of that up. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that now. So what we're going to do is go to flights, and we've got the Palo Alto to Van Nuys as our flight there. I do like the simplicity of this interface. It's absolutely beautiful. Let's edit this now. So we know our first point is Oakland VOR, so we can type that in. So everything has to be typed in. Now, if you do this in SkyVector, one thing you can do, which could be a bit of a time saver, is you just copy and paste all of the data from SkyVector for your intermediate points. including airways. So it's not requiring a massive amount of data entry. So Juliet 1 is our airway. Terminates at Fillmore, FIM, and just verify that it's stuck in our departure and destination airports. So that's great, and that's it really. It wasn't a particularly complex route, it's just one airway. So what is frustrating is when you get something wrong, it will just reject the whole thing, and you can't just say, well look, okay, accept it as is. It will not let you accept anything until it's verified the route, which is probably a good thing. I'm just going to click update now, and it's now stuck in those points. Now, one thing I can't do with Navigraph is set up an instant departure or standard arrival. It's basically a point-to-point IFR tool. It does, however, have really good documentation for departures and arrivals, and they're all Jeppesen charts as well, which is quite a blessing, because in Foreflight, although you have a Jeppesen option, it's a paid upgrade, and obviously something that will increase your expenditure, whereas that's actually built into Navigraph charts. So for Palo Alto, for example, we could have a look at instant departures and there's nothing. Click on the taxi. Obviously there's a taxiway. So what I can do is click that button there, that little radio button, and that will add that chart to the bottom there. So any other charts that I want to use for Palo Alto will appear at the bottom, and I can actually minimize those and then sort of make better use of the screen if I want. So I could use this for helping me while I'm taxiing. I can use the approach charts to monitor my progress on the approach, which is something that I can't do with Foreflight with the basic basic plus package, which is the $100 package, and we'll talk about the packages a bit later. Okay, so I have the chart there for Palo Alto. Let's do the same for Van Nuys. Now it will ask me, it will be downloading the charts if I hadn't already downloaded them, so sometimes a few seconds delay. Looking for the standard arrivals, and each one of these shows you relative to where the airport is, of course. So this has got Fillmore, this is the one we'll use, the Fernando 7 arrival. And what we'll do is from Fillmore 053 to Umba is actually part of the ILS, and I know that because I've done this before. So let's have a look at the ILS approaches, and there's one there, the ILS Zulu approach. So we'll select that, and you see as I select it, it appears in the bottom there as well. So I can then quickly flick between the two. While I'm at it, I may as well get the taxi chart on there as well. Okay, so that's just a documentation page, so I'll just get the right one there. And so when I switch to the Van Nuys charts, I've got these three ready to hand. So we've got the arrival, you've got the ILS, and we've got the taxi chart. And actually what it also does is remembers the zoom, which is pretty handy. So our route will actually take us to Derby, take us to Rays, take us to Fillmore, and then direct to Van Nuys. But obviously we want to pick up on that arrival by then. But this will be the first chart. Now, one thing to note on here, it says not to scale. You see that sign there. That means that, unfortunately, our little mark will not show on here for the arrival. But it will show on the approach into the ILS. It will also show on the IFR chart that you see here. The other options here is you could go to the lower level chart just by clicking that icon, and that will then show you the lower level airways. Sometimes it's a bit confusing. You're looking for an airway and think, where is it? And that's the reason normally. But that's it. That's showing us our route. And when we actually depart from Palo Alto and pick up on the Juliet 1, you'll actually see us flying on the chart. And you see, if you make a comparison now with Foreflight, you see it's actually a lot less cluttered in a very positive way. With Foreflight, you really need to be zooming in quite heavily to actually see at the same sort of level. And even then, there's quite a lot of detail. But Foreflight has lots of tricks up its sleeve and does allow you to filter out information. I tend to leave it alone because I always worry I might not forget I've done it and not be able to bring the information back. So that's just the way it is. Two other things they share in common, by the way, this little crosshair icon on Navigraph, click on that, that will actually centre our aircraft on the screen. Same on Foreflight, in the top right, the icon will put us into the centre of the screen as well. Okay, let's go ahead and set up the aircraft. So here we are at the ramp at Palo Alto. Let us first get some power on. Okay, good. And we'll open up the screens there. Now the flight plan normally will have the last plan that was used, so I'm going to just go and delete that one. And we start from KPAO. Now, one option here would be that we could file from San Francisco, we could file from San Jose, and both of those have SIDs that we could pick up on. I'm not going to do that today, but if we did put those departure points in, give us an access to all of the waypoints from those airports. As we're flying from Palo Alto, we're going to imagine we are basically setting up an airways join here today. So let's go ahead and set the route up. And the way to do that is to start by putting in the entry and the departure and the destination airport. So we've already got Palo Alto in there. And now we'll just put Van Nuys in. There it is, Van Nuys. 262 miles in a straight line. And now what I'm going to do is go ahead and I can use the flight plan in Foreflight here to put in the first waypoint, which is Oakland. There it is, Oakland. The next one is Juliet 1, but that's an airway, and so we need to use the menu and then go down to load airways, choose Juliet 1, and it's already got Oakland as the entry point, and by default the exit's Avenel, which is the next point, but actually we can put Fillmore in. You see that halfway down there, and that's our exit point. And what it will do when we've done that is it loads all the intermediate points, so Avenel, Derby, Rise, Fillmore. So that's our airways route, and then from there we can put the approach in to Van Nuys, and we can do that on the way down. We really need to get weather update before we make that decision. So the first part of the route will be flying towards Oakland, and then the next part of it will be the Oakland to Avenel route. And actually, what I'm going to do is I am going to, well, let's just have a look at this. I'm just going to zoom out. And zoom out a bit more, actually. So our route actually takes us up to Oakland and then down. So that's currently active, and it was a little bit confusing because it's shown in magenta, which some of the airspace is also shown in that colour. What I'm going to do actually is I'm going to, what we'll do is assume it's radar vectors vectoring us onto that Oakland to Avenel route on the Juliet 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the flight plan, and I'm going to activate the Avenel route, which is the Oakland to Avenel, because that's where we're going to be joining the IFR route. So activate that leg. And now, if I switch the flight plan off, you can see what's maybe not clear for the same reason as before, but now we've got the magenta line down here, and that's the route that we're going to actually pick up on from Palo Alto. And what I'm going to assume is that ATC does not want us flying anywhere near San Francisco or Oakland. Will actually vector us around San Jose and then bring us back onto that airway. So that's what I'm going to assume on this occasion. But that's the route for the moment. That's all we need to do. One thing we need to do before we go anywhere, the next thing would be to make sure we've got some fuel. And I'm not really comfortable with where the fuel is there. So let's bring up and open up the fuel. And we can increase that. I think get it up to about 2 hours more than enough for our flight today. We've got £1,000 of overweight pilots and their luggage, so that's fine. So we've got just over 3/4 full, which is a nice weight to be at. And apply those changes, and the fuel's gone up to about half tanks now, which is absolutely fine. So the next thing, we want to find we want to actually get the ATIS for Palo Alto. So here's a number of ways of doing this. Again, Foreflight gives you no shortage of options. So one way of doing it would be to click on KPAO in the flight plan and show full screen, and that switches to the airport tab. I'll just put us back to the maps for the moment. The other way to do it would be to click on KPAO on the chart itself. Try and get that. There we are. And then full screen. So exactly the same. Or we could go to the airport and we could search for it. I know it's there already. And we could put in the ICAO identifier. Or if you didn't know that, Palo Alto. So a contextual search. That search on the map it has to be a ICAO or a waypoint. Couldn't type Palo Alto and have any success there. So this weather is really out of date. So we're not going to take much notice of that. Just want to have a quick look. ATIS is 13527. So let us switch the comm frequency over. And I just lost the little curly icon thing there. It's a bit disconcerting, but it's still working. 135, was it? 13527.
Palo Alto information, Papa 000 Zulu weather. Wind calm. Visibility more than 10. Sky clear. Temperature 14. Dew point 2. Altimeter 3015. Arriving runway 31. Departing runway 31. Advise on initial contact to have Papa.
Okay, 3015, 20 feet. Checking the elevation, that's within limits. Of course, the elevation of the airfield is never, not necessarily the same as where you happen to be parked. So that's fine, 20 feet. What we're going to do is assume that we are limited by ATC. I'm sure that wouldn't allow us just to go bombing up to flight level 280 in a direct line to Juliet 1. There'd be vectoring around of San Jose. So we'll assume that we've been given a fairly tight restriction on the height there. I'm going to take off runway. Well, it's. I think we could actually go runway 13, and at least we're heading in the right direction then. So there won't be any worries there. Altitude is set. We will set the runway heading on departure. Although when I switch the autopilot on, it will hold the wings level and hold our pitch up to 2,000 feet, and then we can switch the navigation in there. Just at the top of the pilot display, you see Oakland to Avenel. Just confirm that route is active. It's a distance 150 nautical miles. We won't be flying as far as Oakland. We'll actually pick up on halfway or something, probably save ourselves 20 miles or something. So let's get going. Now I set these pop-up displays on keyboard shortcuts because they are quite annoying when you look at through the wing views or whatever and they're still there. We'll switch our lights on. Quick check around. This is very quiet. I'm sure this place is absolutely packed. So this N1 spooling up, and IGT starting to fall, so it's a good start by the looks of it. We can switch the generators on. Lovely, it's stabilised, beautiful. Okay, so we've got the ATIS, we're ready to taxi. So what we'll do is we'll be taxiing to the right. This could be a good opportunity really. If you go to the maps view and zoom in, one thing the basic plus package on Foreflight does not give you is it does not overlay your position on a chart. So just to show what I mean, switch to KPO full screen, click on the procedures, the airport diagram, switches to chart view with that in full screen, but on the basic package it doesn't actually show you position on the chart. It's just like having the chart in front of you, but there is a pro version which is a couple $100, and that does show you position on the chart. But there is a kind of cheat, if you can call it that, which is when the map view, as long as you've got the aeronautical option switched on, you actually see a rendition of the airport, and it will show us where we are with that little blue pulsating icon, and so we can use that as a basic way of taxiing, which is really useful. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, brakes tested. Now it does take quite a bit of power to get this beast moving. It's because the it's just a single engine. It's not terribly high on the power.
Approaching runway 31.
So Palo Alto is 700 meters, about 2,000 feet. It's perfectly adequate for this aircraft. Maybe pushing it a bit if you loaded it up. So the only thing I really need to do is just set, I like to set the elevator trim about halfway between the what's the recommended takeoff settings and the maximum up, because otherwise it seems to fight with you when you're trying to you put the autopilot on, and it struggles really to bring the trim up. So we'll just test the flaps while we're at it. Flaps up. Just check. Yeah. Okay, that's good. Okay. Landing light on. Okay, ready to line up. So quite a bit of power just to get us moving. And you do need a bit of power to keep that movement going. So it's not a huge runway, so we won't waste it. So quick checks 1-3, which is what we want. And what I'm going to do here, the technique I'm going to use is to hold it on the brake until we've reached takeoff power. Before I do that, just going to zoom out on Foreflight. As I say, it's currently showing us the magenta line there. We haven't told it we're actually going from we're joining the Oakland to Avenel routes, so it thinks we're still flying up towards Oakland, but that's not really a problem. Okay, let's go for it. So power up. It's all looking good. I'll use about 98% N1 to take off, a little bit of back pressure. Got a little bit of a tailwind, I think, slight tailwind. 75 will be our rotate speed. There we go. Oops. Gear up. And then autopilot on, so hold the attitude, and just bring the screens up and we can Center the heading and put it into heading mode. And bring the vertical speed down a little bit and start accelerating. And while we do that, just bring the power down a tad. We're nearly at 2,000, that's 1,000 feet to go warning. So give ourselves a chance for the speed to build up while we admire the bay. So this is the Ortho X4XP scenery for Southern California with the HD add-on. It's absolutely stunning. It's really transformed flying in the US for me. So we are assuming we are limited to 2,000. And let's say ATC have now told us to fly east. So that's going to send us directly over San Jose Airport. I'm going to watch the speed a little bit because we're obviously hammering along there. Let's just correct the heading slightly. Let's do 15 right. Power right back. Does over control a little bit, this autopilot. Okay, we'll assume we've been cleared to 5,000 now. And so what I'll do is put it into flight level change and then power up a little bit. So I'll hold that speed. So the other thing to show you is synthetic vision, and if I just switch that on now, what it's showing you is the a kind of mesh rendition of the landscape around which we're flying. You can actually see the peaks of the mountains in the distance coloured red, which indicates that we wouldn't clear them at this altitude, although we're just about to do so. So it's very handy, not so much for California, but certainly for flying around some of the mountainous terrain. You see the mountains off to the left there, towards the east of San Francisco. Not particularly high, but you need to be aware of that if you're departing from San Jose, for example, and then heading out that way. Just make sure you have the clearance. That's us locked at 5,000. Speed's building up nicely there, so we got to about 240. So one thing about the flight level change, if it holds the speed, it will not maintain that speed when you level out, so you have to watch it a little bit. So we're getting quite close now to the Juliet 1 airway. Let's give ourselves another climb, say to 12. And again, we can do a flight level change, keep the speed. And the other thing I can do at this point is switch to nav mode. That should engage the GPS mode. And that's turning us left to fly more of an intersect to the line, because he doesn't think I did a good enough job at it. And you see that little cross-track error shows 2 miles to, well, to the right of desired track. But you'll find, obviously, as we get closer, obviously that's coming in now. So this synthetic vision is a great feature, really, when you're flying mountainous terrain. Also enhances the sort of view of airports as well while you're flying the route, which is really useful in poor visibility. And we'll shoot another flight with the synthetic vision using in the mountainous terrain. So we've got a bit of a journey to Avenel, 130 miles. What I will do is I'll probably going to edit this down and maybe join me when we're at flight level 280, as I really wanted to show the use of Foreflight in planning and monitoring the route. So I'll see you when we've reached the cruise altitude 280. Well, hello again. Here we are cruising flight level 280. We're maintaining 320 knots. We have a 22 knot tailwind, so about 298 ground speed if we take away the tailwind. That's not too bad. So just not far from Avalon, just 18 miles to go. A good time to start thinking about the approach. So a couple of things we can do in Foreflight is we can check the latest weather for Van Nuys. So click on the airports tab, and we would have already have this in our recent search anyway. So let's come up here, so we can check the weather. Variable at 4 knots, same weather that was there when we departed, because it's a fairly recent weather report. Altimeter 3005, so I'll make a mental note of that. We are going to be landing runway 16 right. Winds are variable. That's the longer of the 2 runways, also the one that comes off the RLS, which we'll fly into today. So in Foreflight you can have a look at the procedures as well for each of the airports. So we can click on the arrivals and we can have a look at each one of those. So Fernando 7 would be the one we'd use here. Let's just rotate that. And actually what we'll do, just a quick comparison between that and the one in Navigraph with Fernando 7 to give a sort of side-by-side look. I find I do find the font and the lighter illustration actually a lot more easy to read on Foreflight than the Jefferson chart. It's the same data, but it's just presented in slightly different ways. So the next thing we do is have a look at the approach. So we're going to assume it's 1/6 right into Van Nuys. Now I've already set that up in Navigraph, so that's already tagged on there. And what I can do here on Foreflight is I can add the relevant charts to my charts tab. So I just click the plus symbol there, says it's added. And when I lose internet connection, this is cached into the tablet as well. So I'm not reliant on having the internet to get those charts back. What else can we do? Well, let's go ahead and get the ILS approaches up. Now, one thing I do find with Foreflight is that when you click on each one of the approaches, it puts you into the charts view, and so really if you want to compare two charts, the easiest thing to do is add them both. So add that one, go back to the airports tab, click the other one and add that as well, and then I've got, if I go into charts, I've got those two in the charts tab, but it's actually not a smooth sort of switching between the two. And in fact, these two, I don't notice a huge difference between the two of them in any case. Whereas in Navigraph, it's slightly easier. You can make them both active. They appear at the bottom as two different tabs, and then you can quickly switch between them. Like that. So it's quite a bit easier to group all the charts based on a particular airport. So you never too cluttered, never have more than sort of 3 or 4, 5 tops charts in view at the same time. So what we need to do actually is we need to have a look at the arrival. So we'll do that in both Foreflight and Navigraph. So this is Fernando 7. We just passed Avenel, we're on the way to Derby, and I need to look at the height restrictions here. Now it does look like we have a certain minimum height, which is 11,000 on this leg, and this coming down to 8,000 and then 6,000 as we go towards Umba. I don't really want to start descending this early on, but I think probably when we get to Derby we'll probably need to set up a descent to come down and hit the 9,000 feet limit. And in fact it says at Peru expect 11,000, so actually that's what we'll set. So currently 28,000, that's 17,000 to lose. So do a little bit of maths there, probably do that in the descent, but probably 1,500 feet a minute and see how we get on with that. Do bear in mind we are cruising at 318, so that's over 5 miles a minute. So that's 44 miles is about 8.5 minutes, or 8.5 minutes to fly it. So it's it's going to go fairly quickly, but still give us plenty of time to do our descent. So when we get to Derby, I think we'll set up a descent about 1,000 foot a minute and come down to 11,000, and assume that we'd be given to cross Peru at 11,000, even though it's not actually on our that's not actually a waypoint on our route, but we'll just put that in as a restriction. So let's turn to the aircraft now and get the approach set up. We'll assume it's 1/6 right. So for that we hit the procedures button, select the approach. Need to choose between 1/6 right and Yankee and Zulu. So I think we're just going to say let's go for the Zulu approach. I don't think there's any difference actually from where we're approaching it, so select that, The entry point will be Fillmore, and then we can load that, and that will now appear below our airways. One thing to be a bit careful of is it will assume we're flying the approach having gone to Van Nuys, and so Van Nuys 100 degrees from Fillmore, and then Fillmore 283 more or less the reciprocal of that from Van Nuys, if that makes sense. So one mistake I've made quite a lot in the past is to stick in when we get to Fillmore, so okay, let's fly the Fillmore route, and that is not going to end happily. That's going to end up very, very confused. We actually need to fly the Zidon route, which is the first point on our ILS. So let's just bring up the Zulu one, and you can see the initial approach fix after Fillmore, Zidon. So we will actually fly that route. Okay, so we just passed Derby on the way to Rays. That's 43 miles from here. And then from Rays to Fillmore is another 22 miles. So about 66 miles or so in total, 65 miles. So we're just over 5.5 miles a minute. So we're talking about 10 minutes, and we need to drop 17,000 feet. So let's go ahead and set that up now. And what we'll do is we'll set up our 11,000 will be our target altitude. And we'll do that by vertical speed, because that gives us a lot more control over our descent profile. And we'll put that in at, say, 18,000 initially. And I'm just going to control the speed, because I don't really want to, we don't need to be speeding up at all. Inevitably gain a little bit of speed in a descent. I've already set the ATIS for Van Nuys 127.55. I'm not sure we get ATIS for some reason, so we're probably going to have to rely on Foreflight. I don't know why that's not working on X-Plane. What I have done is just modified the map view, which shows us our more or less from where we are right now to where we're landing. And what we can do now, having decided on the approach, is to click Procedure and approach into Van Nuys and 16 right Zulu via Fillmore, and add that to the route. And now that will actually show our route. Also what we can do is we could get rid of the high level IFR chart, and in fact we can simplify it even further by turning off the basic aeronautical, and it gives us a very, very clear image of our route and our aircraft and the major city outline. So it's actually a very nice view where you're using Foreflight to complement other information, as we are here with the G1000 on board the Cirrus Jet. Now at the bottom of the Foreflight screen I've set up some telemetry, and this is completely configurable. Gives us information I think is quite useful. So for example, I've got an ETA to the next waypoint, so if I'm doing something like here, I'm trying to descend to a certain height, I can see, we can see 5 minutes till we get to raise. We're descending 1800 feet a minute, so it's going to be about 9,000 feet off where we are at the moment, which is about right. That takes us down to 14,000, and then we've just got 3,000 to drop between Raise and Fillmore, which is about right. In fact, if anything, I think I could probably just bring that up a little bit to 1,500 feet a minute, so slowing the descent slightly. Just feeding in a little bit of power, so I'm going to keep the I'd like to keep the ground speed going. Obviously, as we get lower, we're holding an indicated airspeed, more or less, but that indicated airspeed is effectively works out to a lower ground speed as we get nearer the ground, or true airspeed, shall I say. So just a quick brief on what we're doing with the flight plan part of it. So at the moment we're flying to Raise and then Fillmore. When we get to Fillmore, I'm going to activate the Zydom route, okay, which is 056 degrees. So a couple of ways of doing that. I could select Zydom and just say fly direct to it, or I could just activate that route, and that's probably the preferred way, because if we activate the Zydom part of the approach, it's activating the Fillmore to Zydom route, whereas if I say direct to Zydom now, it'll just fly direct to that waypoint, if that makes sense. One thing that is bad about doing the latter is that all of your altitude clearances are based on flying that point to point and not cutting corners, so you've got to be a little bit careful. And you can see out the window here's a little bit of mountainous terrain, so it's not something to gloss over. It's something we need to take quite seriously. What I'm going to do actually is I'm going to set up a heading of 056, which is our uncorrected heading to Zydom from Fillmore. And so as we approach Fillmore, I can switch that in. It'll start at least pointing in the right direction. I can then activate the Fillmore to Zydom track, and hopefully at that point it will it'll be more or less on track, obviously allowing for a little bit of wind. Now we've got quite a strong tailwind, so if we're going to be turning to the left, then we'll probably need to allow for that a little bit. So let's say 050 is the heading, to allow for the slight crosswind which we'll have at that point. And one thing about the Navigraph charts is that it will display your representation of the aircraft on the charts, but it won't do that on these not to scale charts. So unfortunately you can't see it on the arrival chart here, but it will display on the ILS chart when we're on that, and also on the ground. And see where we are. You see the representation on the Navigraph chart is very much clearer, and that's simply because there's a lot more information on the Foreflight screen, which we can turn off. We can actually declutter that quite significantly, and we can obviously bring in the information that we want. Now we dropped below the 18,000 transition altitude, so now I am going to switch to standard pressure, and it's 3005 if I remember rightly, so let's stick that in there. So you can do that as soon as you've been cleared below that transition altitude, which we have, and we're just about to pass Rays, and we're 16,000 with 5,000 feet to go, which will take about 3 minutes on our current descent profile, and we've got just over 4 minutes to go until we reach Fillmore, and at that point we need to come down further. I'm just going to have a quick look at the chart there, and we can see we get down to Fillmore and then 6,000 across to Umber. And that's verified in Navigraph as well. Of course, this is the same data, just represented slightly differently. So I've just moved the cursor down to Zidon, which is the part of the navigation we're going to activate after we've reached Fillmore in a few moments. But I'm just going to close that for the moment. Quick weather check for Van Nuys. Okay, it's just been updated. Variable at 5 knots, altimeter 3004. Okay, so still plan to land runway 16 right, ILS approach, and it's all loaded up, ready to go. Now, when you move the map around like this, it takes off the mode where you lock the plane to the centre. So if I do that now, we can see it's following the aircraft in. Sometimes though, it's just nice to be able to get that sort of radar-like view. And just quickly, we can actually bring in the VFR section to show the mountainous terrain that we're traversing at the moment. And the approach is interesting as well. We do actually pass between these two mountain ranges here. And we have to be pretty careful about our height and make sure our position in particular. So we just got the 1,000-foot warning, so just about to arrive at 11,000, and we have just over a minute to go, so that's worked out perfectly. Except for we want to come down to 6,000. So I'm just going to speed that up. I don't know how I managed to miss that, but I've not been updating that with our descents. So try to keep the speed under control as well. So we need to be 6,000 by Zidon, so that we have a bit of a distance to go, so it's not really too worrying. But we are fast approaching Fillmore. As I say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to heading mode, and that was going to fly us heading 050 while we sort out the flight plan. Now we're just about to descend below 10,000. The landing light has been on. I should have switched that off. Just checking. So we'll wait until it comes down to about 15 seconds to run, and then switch to heading mode. There we go. I think we can stop descending quite so rapidly at this point. So 8,000 by Fillmore, 6,000 by Zidon. Start slowing up a little bit as well. So as I say, we're now turning to a heading, so let's get the flight plan part of it sorted. So I've got Zidon already selected, menu, activate leg, and what we can now do is switch back to nav, and that will fly and intersect, get us back onto that track, but we're not far off, more or less on there. Keep the speed up until we get near our final turn. Does throw it around a little bit, does oversteer slightly, which I hope it doesn't do in the real aircraft. Now as we're getting lower, we could actually bring the synthetic vision back in. It's a nice assurance that we are clearing the mountains, but also in poor visibility this is absolutely fantastic for just giving you that confidence that you're actually on track with the runway and it's going to appear out of the mist at some point. Now notice on Navigraph there's no way we can put in an approach or an arrival even, so actually at this point Navigraph isn't so useful in this mode, but if I switch to the Van Nuys charts and bring up the Zulu approach, which is this one here, you actually see our little guy now just appearing on the edge of the chart there, and that will update in real time. So as I say, you get that included in the Navigraph subscription. It is not including the basic plus subscription with Foreflight, but it is included in the Pro Plus, which is $100 more. So just looking at the height profile, so 6,000 into Umba. So when we're established on the 164 track, we can descend to 4,900 to Jinats and then 3,800. So what I'm going to do is stick that in now. So 4,900 would be the next one. So it will hold that for the moment. It's actually pre-selected magenta here, 3,800, which is the next descent. I'm not really sure why it's done that. I would expect 4,900 to be highlighted. Beautiful time in the evening as well. Absolutely stunning. I think I'm going to have to get a shot. One for the album. So just approaching Zidon now. A few seconds to go. And what I'll do, when we're just passing Zidon, just bring the speed back a little bit to 210. That's 210 ground speed, I should add. Although we don't have much of a tailwind at this point. And we should only invoke that descent to 4900 when we're established on the 164 radial, or heading, should I say, because only then do we know we have our clearance from terrain. And you can see there's quite a bit of it, and that's starting to poke up on the synthetic vision as well. His turn's about to start now. So in view now. It does get a bit choppy on the frame rate, I'm afraid, as we get into Los Angeles area. I suppose for obvious reasons. So you can see the pole just moving over there. That's going to confirm when we're on track there, and we can actually start our descent to vertical speed mode and then bring us down. And we don't need to be in too much of a hurry. We're only dropping 1,000-ish feet. And you can see the valley, you actually see Van Nuys 16 right as well in the distance. I didn't want to spoil the surprise too much, but that's the valley we're going between. And the next descent is 3,800, so I'll get that ready as well. So just about to pass Ginat on the approach. You can see that very clearly on the Navigraph RFR display. As I could bring the chart up in Foreflight, but it just doesn't have the layover of the graphic for the aircraft on it, so I much prefer the map view for this. So bring the speed back a little bit. We do have quite a considerable distance to travel until we get to Van Nuys. It does look nearby, but it's a fair few miles away. So we should be hitting the 3,800 more or less dead on. It's better really to come in a little bit beforehand, but I underdid it a little bit with the descent profile. Now it's switched to localizer mode and we're localizer established. We won't see the glide slope come until we're much nearer Furry, which is the final approach fix. So still quite fast, we'll just bring the speed back a little bit. I mean, generally speaking, it's not a problem in this aircraft. It flies a little bit like an airliner at altitude, but as soon as you take the speed off and you bring the gear down, it acts like an air brake, so you really only want to do that when you absolutely have to. And then you're feeding power in for the gear, and you're feeding power in as you put the flaps in as well, something you're not really doing so much in an airliner. There's a rotor marker. You see the glide slope coming now, so let's stick that into approach mode to activate the glide slope. Just bringing some speed again. Just keep it about 200. And about half a degree nose up. So just about now we'll stick the gear down. Yeah, thanks. It's very, very choppy here, I'm afraid. And just bring the power down a little bit, and we'll try and establish about a 180 descent. And we can hold that till we get quite near. So it's 6.8 to the missed approach point. I think we'll actually let the speed bleed off a little bit to 160 or so. And you see on Foreflight, you see the synthetic vision. You actually see KVNY written there, so it's confirmation that we're actually heading into the right airport. Not that we ever doubted ourselves. Also confirmation, you can actually see the two runways there, and as we get lower, those little pointers that look like golf tees actually are obstructions, and they will change colour as they become more of an issue to us. At the moment they're white because we're well above the altitude. It's fairly flat here though, I mean, not a lot to worry about. So we'll hold about 160 until we're nearer. We're just above the flap limit speed, which is intentional because the moment we bring flap in, that's like an air brake as well. I'm going to do now is hand flight from here. So disengage the autopilot. Bring the power down a little bit and just a bit of flapping. And so you see I just pitch the nose down slightly just to keep the descent going because it's going to want to climb. And we need about 700 foot a minute really to maintain our descent profile. Let's get back onto that. Just let the speed bleed off slowly. I'm going to keep us well above 110, really, because when we bring in the final stage of flap, it's going to really bring us to a halt fairly quickly. So with full flap, adding quite a bit of power doesn't seem to make much difference to the speed, but just in case we need it. There we go. Now Foreflight will automatically switch to the taxi diagram, the taxi chart for the airport, which is great if you've got the Pro Plus account, not so great if you don't. I normally just switch back and then zoom in, and we need to put the aeronautical on as well. That's better. So the basic aeronautical layer actually gives you a sort of very simplified taxi diagram. Ooh, frame rate's terrible. And I think I'm going to park in here. Stick it there, I think. There we go. Okay. So that was a shortish flight with Foreflight Navigraph in the background there. The next flight we'll do, I think we'll go to Vegas, a similar sort of length flight, and not the most difficult, not the most trivial airway route. We'll use Navigraph as the main form of navigation with Foreflight in the background. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe if you don't already. Thumbs up if you like it, and I welcome your comments. So thanks for your company today, and see you on the next one. Take care. Bye bye.